to the Family Movie Night podcast, where we want to help your family have better conversations around the content you consume. This is episode 52, and we are talking about the great film Ron's Gone Wrong, available on Disney Plus. And as always, I'm here with the hero of our podcast, Ron himself, the Bebot that everyone has been waiting for. Tiki taka all over the place. Donnie Dorsey, how you doing?
Bleep, 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 bloop, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Hello, fans. Hello, everyone.
I was watching Futurama last night, which is another great comedy involving robots. And it's a horror movie episode. And Bender is looking on the wall, and written in blood is 101000110. And they go, well, what does that say? And he goes, oh, nothing. It's gibberish. And then he looks in the mirror and it's backwards. He goes, 01101111001. No! And he runs away. One of my favorite jokes ever. Just a good, binary coding joke, but it's very funny. Anyway. All right. And of course, the villain of our podcast, horrible tech conglomerates themselves. Sawyer Hewlett, how are you feeling? Tim Cook himself.
Good. I prefer Mark Zuckerberg, or now Elon Musk. I like a good tech villain. I think.
Okay. Well, there you go. Very good. We get
any of them are good villains. Okay.
Okay. All right. I guess I don't know how to take that. So
Tim Cook is just lame. Okay. That's okay. My only thing.
Well, this is very much a Tim Cook parody right here in this movie.
Yeah, it is.
Is very much. I mean, he looks like Tim. I mean, this is very much Apple joke.
Well, but Tim Cook is a Steve Jobs parody in real life is the thing. So I mean, how deep do we want to go?
That's a take right there. All right. So let's go ahead and before we get to talking more about our commentary on the Apple Corporation, let's begin by Donnie Dorsey. Tell them what we do on this podcast.
Yeah, so on this podcast, we encourage every family at Community Christian Church to have a monthly movie night to help you and your children build memories, start conversations that matter. The goal of our family ministry is to help you raise your children to love Jesus and his way of life above all other things. And we know that critical to that is for you to have a routine, regular time of connection and shared experiences that will help you build stronger relationships.
Yeah, and movie nights are great opportunities to do that, because movies are not just easy ways to share laughter and joy, fear and sadness in safe environments, but they also give us chances to talk about what matters most to us in ways that are meaningful and memorable with your children. And on this podcast, we want to not only recommend some movies you can watch on your monthly movie night, but give you some ideas of meaningful conversations you can have with your kids during or after the movie.
And as always, we don't want this podcast to be another one of those things that you feel guilty as a parent for not doing. We really want to make it easier for you and your kids to be together and to enjoy laughter and have these conversations that actually matter. And so you don't need to feel like you're obligated to watch this movie. We do hope that you do, though, because we think this is a great movie to have a really important conversation about social media and technology with your kids. And in case you don't know what movie we're talking about, this is Ron's Gone Wrong from 2021. It came out in October of last year. It is about Barney, a socially awkward schoolboy who receives a robot named Ron, a walking, talking, digitally connected device that's supposed to be his best friend out of the box. Barney is excited to finally have his own robot until his new toy starts to hilariously malfunction, drawing the attention of a shady executive who wants to protect his company's stock price at all costs. And this movie is something my family went to go see when it was in theaters. But Donnie Dorsey, was this the first time you had seen this movie?
Yeah, this was the first time I'd seen it. I actually hadn't heard of it prior to it being brought up for conversation, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was definitely gave me some vibes of Mitchell's versus the Machines.
I thought the same thing. Even that little bubble. Bubble is the name of the Apple type corporation that exists. The bubble that the Bubble Corporation lives in looks very much like the Mitchells versus the Machines Corporation thing.
Exactly.
And, yeah. Similar dynamic between the creator of the robot in this. And Olivia Colman is the voice of the villain in Mitchell's versus the Machine, and is the voice of the grandma in this movie. So Olivia Colman just fighting robots left and right, man. I love it. But yeah, this one's very funny, very heartwarming, great performances all around. Sawyer Hewlett, villain of our podcast. You are a robot on the inside anyway. So did this movie work for you? Did it compute?
Yeah, I liked it. I just I don't know if this is just like a topic that I enjoy movies grappling with, but like between this and Mitchell's versus the Machines, like we've got two great movies that talk about technology in a way that kids can understand, and I really appreciate that. And this movie, I think, like Mitchell's versus the Machines is great because it kind of feels action adventure with humor, obviously, and stuff. This one definitely feels a lot funnier to me.
Yeah, I think they're both pretty equal. I think Mitchell's versus the Machine probably sits higher for me. I think it was a little more emotional for me, but I don't know. I don't know where you guys sit.
I would agree with that. I overall would say I like Mitchell's versus the Machines better. But in terms of comedy, I mean, I definitely laughed harder and more in this movie.
I don't know. And I know it's been a while since we watched Mitchell's versus the Machines. I just watched it a little while ago with my kids. When they take the dad's face on Mitchell's versus the Machine and they put it on that screaming chimpanzee or whatever, is the screaming gibbon or whatever. I don't think I've laughed quite as hard as when I saw that. Was pretty darn good.
That was pretty
Donnie,
good.
where do you sit on this in Mitchell's versus the Machines? You're muted, Donnie. Donnie, the technology is taking over Donnie.
No. I'd say it's close to Mitchell's Machines, but I definitely like. I have to put Mitchell's versus the Machines ahead of this, primarily because I like the way they incorporated the family unit a little bit more. Because I feel like this, like in Ron's Gone Wrong, they had the family there, but the family was kind of like a sub character, like a minor character, as opposed to where, like in Mitchell's versus the Machines, they were very much in a part of everything.
I agree.
Yeah, I feel like Mitchell versus the Machines is a movie that is like explicitly about family. This one I feel like is less so concerned with having a conversation about family. It's more concerned with other stuff that we're going to talk about.
I totally agree. It's more about friendship than anything.
Yeah, exactly.
So Zach Galifianakis as Ron Sawyer.
Excellent.
I know you already mentioned it off mic, but just, I mean,
so funny. Yeah. I love, like, from the moment that he was like, "Hello, Absalom," I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna like this." Oh man,
yeah, he's hilarious, and the animation they do on him. There are several times where his eyes go from the top of his head to the bottom of his body, and they look exactly like a butt. And I'm just gonna say, for my kids, if you can make them say the word butt or laugh at butts, it's gonna be a winner for them. And so it's pretty hilarious. And Ron's cute. They're cute little devices, and very, very entertaining. I will say, I think I like the robot design better in Ron's Gone Wrong than Mitchell's and the Machines.
Yeah, for sure.
Because honestly, it feels like something we would have. Like the robots in Ron's and Mitchell's versus the Machine feel, and I think intentionally so, feel very much like, these kind of automaton looking things. Yeah. This very much does look like, I could see how we could go from, iPods to smartphones to tablets.
It felt like a giant Yamaguchi, like the little,
what are those little
Tamagotchi.
Like Tamagotchi.
Well, and it also felt like, this is where my brain, this is going to tell you, I instantly was like, oh, that looks like a real life R2-D2. Like it looked like if R2-D2 was real. And it was,
So anyway, I think we all would recommend this movie's good. We didn't even talk about, there's a really heartfelt moment right at the end of the movie. As you would expect in every kid's movie, there's a moment. I don't think I cried either time watching this movie. I know I didn't this time, but I don't think I did in the theater. But it's pretty close. It tugs at the heartstrings, just doesn't quite resonate. I would say one of the things, I love this movie. I think your kids will love it. It's definitely a family movie night movie. I think for me, early on in the movie, there's a feeling of throwing a lot of stuff at the wall. Like there's a feeling of, you've got the stories about this kind of lonely, nerdy kid, but then he's also from like this immigrant family, and it kind of feels like they want to kind of talk about what's it like to be from an immigrant family, but then that's pretty quickly dropped. Like it's an element of the movie, but like also not. Like it's an element like, you know, because Coco kind of deals with it. There's a lot of movies that kind of deal with those similar themes. And I had trouble just as a viewer going, what am I supposed to be paying attention to?
Yeah, I got that too, because as soon as because like when she introduced very like specific cultural specific food items, I was like, oh, okay, this is probably going to be incorporated in some way.
Yes.
And then it immediately was like, and now he's at school. What?
Yeah. I was telling Donnie this while you were on the phone off when we weren't recording yet, Nathan. My favorite part in the movie, and it's kind of when the movie hooks me, is there's a scene where they go to this bubble store, where Barney takes Ron there, and it's a great scene. They're trying to escape the bubble store is the thing, and it's funny and it's fun action. And from then, like if you make it to that part, and you'll be in for the rest of the movie, I think, because it's really fun from then on.
You know, and I think there's a way in which people, and I'm one of these people, kind of almost tease a little bit of how perfectly crafted Pixar does everything. Like there's no fat on anything, like on a Pixar movie. And sometimes that feels a little bit like a robot. It feels a little bit like carbon press. This movie made me go, they should have gone to Pixar for a little bit. Like there should have been 3 rewrites, because I feel like that's the one thing that kept the emotion from hitting quite as hard was that there was not a clear through line of what am I supposed to be feeling. But that is not to say, once again, I would highly recommend this movie. I think it's very funny. I do think it's emotional enough. I think your kids are going to enjoy it. And more importantly, I think it gives you a chance as a family to talk about what is our theme for this episode, which is to talk about how would God have us use technology? How would God have us use social media? Because believe it or not, Jesus never had to use a smartphone. He never had to use social media. So it's not in the Bible. Nowhere in the Bible does it talk about the amount of screen time your kid should have. Nowhere in the Bible does it talk about how should I handle the dangers and all the different things that could happen with social media. And so we as a parent, we as families kind of have to navigate this with Jesus in mind, because we want to do everything with Jesus at the center. And so we certainly, and I love this about Ron's Gone Wrong, is Ron's Gone Wrong is not a movie that is terrified of technology. You know, there are certain movies that are kind of like, you'll see these movies where the kid is so reliant on technology, and what he learns is like to put the smartphone down and go outside and never play with the phone again, you know? And the movie itself is kind of like, smartphones are scary, you know? And then there are other movies where the other side of the thing is like, we should really just fully embrace, and technology is a good in the world and we need to deal with that. Well, this movie, I think, does a good job of kind of saying, hey, these parents are freaked out, because in one of my favorite scenes in the movie, the dad says, I don't want to get you this robot because you're going to be like every other kid who is on the playground obsessed with their technology. And he goes, I don't want you to be addicted to and he pulls out his phone and he's just looking at his phone, because we as parents get addicted to phones as well. And so I think it's a good conversation for us to have. And I think the best place for us to start is to talk about that technology by itself is not inherently evil or good, right? There's nothing about technology that just by itself is inherently evil or good. At the same time, though, it doesn't seem to just be a neutral factor in our lives, because what we do know is that the creators of smartphones, the creators of social media, have openly said the phones are meant to be addicting. They have created these devices so that you will never want to put them down, which is why over and over again, when they do studies where they talk to kids and they ask kids in elementary school and in teenage years, this may be hard to believe for your teenager, but the number one thing when they say, if you could change one thing about your parents, what would it be? And they say, I wish my parents would put their phone down more.
Yeah.
I wish my parents would put the phone down. Even your teenager says, I wish they would put the phone down and talk to me more. And I know the defensive,ness, because I feel defensive already. I'm the one who said it. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. I'm not on my phone all the time. It's these kids who are on their phone all the time. If my teenager wants me to put my phone down, they need to put their phone down. Yeah. But the phone by itself, right? The tablets by themselves, they are meant to be addicting. Donnie, you are a tech guru yourself. You work in the technology field, and I saw you shaking your head. I mean, has that been your experience? That kind of the idea is let's try and create these things to be as addicting as possible?
I mean, because I've worked in different areas, but I mean, like from websites and stuff like that, things are geared to make sure that it captures your attention, holds your attention. I mean, they use things as like marketing hooks and things like you see something, and that's why like you can look at a website and it automatically scrolls on certain things. The intention is to keep you there and to hold you there. I mean, like any app that you've encountered in the last year or 2 years, anything that has a viral attachment to it has that mentality because the idea is I want to encourage people to stay on this application or stay on this website or stay on this device. And that's why, things like that's why you do notifications. Notifications are simply there to give serotonin boost, and they're also there to make sure that you're constantly reminded that, hey, you should come back to the device or come back to this application, and so you have to create levels of like boundaries, to protect your peace. Like, and some people are like, well, I get peace from looking at my phone. It's like, well, a lot of times it steals more of your peace than it gives you.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think to that point, even small things like we know that the light that comes off of your phone, because of the way it simulates sunlight, if you are using it right before you go to bed, that's why you're getting as bad sleep as you are, because we know that it does this. Now, we're not saying any of this to say, once again, you shouldn't have a smartphone. All
Nope.
three of us have smartphones. Right?
not at all.
I also didn't mention at the beginning of this, and I failed to. Heidi was not able to join us here. I know Heidi has a smartphone because all of us communicate via our smartphone. So we are not saying that technology is an ungodly thing that you need to run away from. This is not calling you back to be Amish and
Not at all. Not at all.
to turn away. But we are also saying there are dangers, especially and not just the kind of dangers we think of like some predator out there who's going to find me through my smartphone. There are dangers just through even safe use of the phone for our kids. And a lot of this comes from research that was done by a researcher, a sociology professor named Jean Twenge. She wrote a book called iGen: Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. And what she's talking about is what is often referred to as Gen Z. Now, a lot of people don't know this because I am the millennial pastor on staff. So people say this to me all the time. These millennials, and when they're talking about millennials, they're talking about people in their 20s. You're not talking about millennials. Millennials are everyone that was born from 1980 to 1995, right? So we're coming up on people in the youngest millennials are in their late 20s. The generation right after them, Sawyer and I were having this conversation just yesterday about where Sawyer fits. Sawyer is a Gen Z. Gen Z is people, he's the oldest of the Gen Z. That is people born from 1995 to 2011. Now, you can find all different stats of online because people break generations at different places, but most people agree somewhere between 1993 to 1997 is the breaking point for Gen Z. And the reason why is because they break it based on how old you were when the iPhone came out. The iPhone came out in the summer of 2007. And the reason why is because for millennials, maybe people don't know this, millennials are people who are coming of age at the time of the turn of the century. Exactly. People are coming at the time, or not the century, the millennium, I should say. It's both the century and the millennium. But that's why we're called the millennials. People who were older elementary school to high school at 2000. So late 90s, early 2000s, people who are at that place. That was the chief defining thing for us. The internet's really coming out. We remember there not being wide use of the internet. We also grew up with that. Well, Gen Z are people who, from the time they were born, their parents had cell phones. And by the time that they were in their teenage years, upper elementary to teenage years, everybody had a smartphone. Everyone's starting to get a smartphone because it's starting to come out. And this book is about the way that smartphones in particular have changed the wiring of people's brains. and particularly people under the age of 18 where your brain is most malleable. Now, I don't want to get into too much, but here's one of the things that they mention in this, which is, and I'm just going to read this quote from the book. They say, once again, the split between screen and non-screen activities is unmistakable. This is what she says. Teens who spend more time on screens are more likely to be depressed, and those who spend more time on non-screen activities are less likely to be depressed. Eighth graders who are heavy users of social media increase their risk of depression by 27%, while those who play sports, go to religious services, or even do homework instead cut their risk significantly. The teens who are the most active on social media are also those who are most in danger of developing depression, a mental health issue that devastates millions of U.S. teens each year. The book goes into a lot of details on how this happens, but basically what they said is the younger you are, if you kind of put it on a graph, the younger you are when you start, and the higher screen activity you are that you have at that age, your rates of depression, anxiety, loneliness, isolation, and then eventually, for many, suicidal ideation, they go through the roof. The younger you are and the more time you have on screens. Now, once again, this is not for us to say if you let your kids have any screen time that you're a bad parent.
Nope.
Full disclosure, my kids have, they don't have their own tablets, but we have tablets, and they have set aside time every day that they're allowed to be on those tablets. So this is not me saying that it is evil to let your kids, there tends to be a hysteria around screen time use in our world.
Yeah.
And I don't think either approach is very helpful. What we want to have the conversation about is how do we help our kids learn to really use technology in a way that benefits their life? Because what is now clear, we do have enough research. Smartphones and tablets are not even the same as watching TV. You know, when I was a kid, everyone was like, if you watch TV, your brain's going to rot. And it turns out by the research, that's not necessarily the case. Families who sit to watch a family movie night, it is not the same, does not do the same thing to your brain as a kid who sits on their phone the entire time and never looks up from it. So let's just start the conversation there of why we think this is important. Donnie, you were talking a good bit earlier about this. Do you want to jump in here on why you think it's important as a dad?
I mean, like, first of all, kind of like coming from the idea of like as a dad, but also as a person that is in technology, I find that I'm much more of a person that is more likely to put a lot of provisions for my kids, and not because I don't want them to be like encouraged or like liking technology, but I don't want them to become so inundated with it that it becomes the only thing they have. Like that they don't nurture their creativity, that they don't nurture their, their communication skills, because I don't want them to be like, so going, hey, let's look at this screen and create things here rather than create moments with my family or create moments with my siblings. Because I think as a parent, like there's that balance, because I think for any parent that's probably watching this is that you probably have those moments where you feel guilty, where you're like, hey, I got stuff I got to do. I'm going to let my kids watch some TV, or I'm going to let them watch a movie, or I'm going to give them the tablet. There's nothing wrong with that. What I'm saying, or what I'm proposing, I guess, in an idea is that make sure there are limits. Like the limits have to be there. Like it's not just for kids, it's for us as adults as well, because the overexposure of it sometimes is that when you get on a tablet, your tablet is literally being guided by whatever you choose. Yes. And so when that happens, you can become more excited to interact with technology than you are to interact with someone else, because the technology does exactly what you tell it to do. Whereas the person, when you're like talking to your sibling and you're like, hey, I want to play this game, and you're like, I don't want to play a game, it's stupid. It's like, no, but you need that relationship. You need to build that communication, that dialogue, that ability to relate and connect to others, because we are relational people. We are relational beings. Like there's a reason why God uses people to get things done, and he doesn't send big old telegrams and such. It's like, because people make change, not, the things that the people make.
Well, and I think that's great, Donnie. I think so. That's the number one thing. If you forget anything else we say, limits and boundaries around it, and age appropriate limits and boundaries. So
Yes.
honestly, when your kids are below 5, very little to none. There's not really much of a need for them to be on a smartphone at 2 years old. Like there's just keeping it very limited from that age of like 5 to 10 to 11. Very limited boundaries. Mom and dad get to see what's on the phone. Mom and dad get to see what's on the smart, on the tablet, those kind of things. We get to know, and we tell you it doesn't live in your room. The smartphone has its own room in the house, and it's got its own little charger where it gets to eat while we eat family meals. Like, all of those kind of things, like it gets its own place. And then in the teenage years, as you're trying to give them more autonomy and independence, maybe they do at some point have their own smartphone and their own tablet, but I would still, once again, have limits on it, boundaries on it. I've already told my kids, when you have a smartphone, I have this on my phone. So this is not something I'm telling them that I don't. Because of my addiction to pornography in the past, I have screenshot accountability on my phone. My phone, and there's an app I have on it. It takes screenshots of my phone every minute. And it puts it in the cloud, and my wife has access to that. Other people have it, so that everything's accountable. Everyone knows. And I told my kids, when you have a smartphone, all of our tablets have that on it. All of the phones that they use in the house, once again, it's not theirs. They're mine currently. They all have it, and they know anything you do, I get to see. There will never be a time you can do something I don't see. When you're a teenager, that's going to be the same way, as long as I'm paying for it. But it may also be, if you've got a teenager and you can't really put limits on how much they use it, right? Because you don't know where they are and what they're doing. It may be when we have family meals, there are no tablets at the table.
Yep.
There are no phones at the table. Because what becomes clear in this book, and I don't want to keep going over it, but the research continues to state the amount of face-to-face interactions that you have are the one thing that compete with the screen time. So it's not just putting the phone away, it is then having face-to-face interactions, because what has happened for so many of these kids is it's a both and. One, their screen time has increased, but because their screen time has increased, their level of social face-to-face interactions with other people have also decreased. All their interactions with their friends are over text. All the things they're doing are not face-to-face. They're not just hanging out for long periods of time with other friends. And with your young kids, you're their primary relationship. And so I think, to Donnie's point, a boundary you place is, when we watch TV together, the phones aren't there. When we watch movies together, the phones aren't there. When we're playing games, the phones go away. When we're sitting around the house, the phones aren't there. You can have a phone. There can be a time for it. And you as a family can kind of figure out when to do the phone, when to set the boundaries. But I think we're all agreeing the boundaries are important. Donnie, you look like you want to say something, so I didn't know if you want to ask something.
No, I think you kind of brought it home as far as what I was trying to get across, is like it's so important, because I think as parents, we hold the responsibility of helping them, because at those ages they don't have the level of self-control built in, so they have to have us as safeguards. And it's not, and don't look at it as, oh, I'm keeping my kid from being caught up with technology. Think it as you're accelerating your kid's ability to be a great social interactor with other people and be able to build meaningful relationships.
Yeah. Well, and those things, those relationships, those are the things that create the mental muscle that ward off things like depression and anxiety and isolation and loneliness. And they allow them to kind of build those relationships that become these networks that actually help them, not just in their social life, but in their personal life. And eventually in their devotion to Jesus, that they would have a mental toughness to be able to live through it. And I think that's what this movie does really good. Sawyer, you were talking earlier about how this movie does a really good job of talking about how Ron, even though he's a piece of technology, the way that he malfunctions actually causes Barney, the kind of socially isolated kid, to interact in the world. You want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, and I think like this movie is obviously not afraid of technology, and that's kind of why I like it, because I feel like, you know, something that my parents did a good job of is protecting me from myself. Now, like, I want to be clear, like, I made plenty of mistakes with technology and stuff like that. I looked at porn on my first iPod and stuff like that. Okay, it's gonna happen to a certain extent. Okay, but like, I think what we can do is, especially as parents, what you can do and what my parents did a good job of is creating guardrails where, like, social interaction is never going to be a handicap for me, even though, like, I'm a quiet person. I'm a more introverted person.
I disagree. Your
I
social
know.
interaction is terrible.
I know Nathan can attest to just how awkward I am, and it's all because of my first iPod. No,
That's right.
but no, I mean, I just think this movie and, like, a conversation that you should have with your kids is, like, why you're establishing those guardrails is the thing. Because, like, when I was a kid, my parents put up those guardrails, and it was the best thing they ever did. They never explained to me why, and it was infuriating. And so I just think, like, the biggest thing you can do is talk about it with your kids. My parents loved basically just, like, creating guardrails and then be like, just trust us. Okay. And they were right to put those guardrails there. But there's a level of conversation that I think you should engage in with your child that will enable them to understand what you're doing. Those conversations are always going to be good to have, is the thing. So
I think that's huge. And I think that's really the place I want to kind of land all of this is the solution to this problem, as we said, is not to rid your home of technology. It's to become wise with technology. There's a great book out there called The Tech Wise Family by Andy Crouch, and he talks a lot about this and a lot of really good practical solutions. And his whole point is it's not to be tech free, it's to be tech wise. And the definition of foolish is a person who is careless. And so many of us are so tech careless with technology. Everywhere we go, we see people on phones. We ourselves are on our phones all the time, and we're not aware of how hurried and lonely and anxious we are at all times. And the goal is, how do I become wise about this? And the thing he talks about a lot, and so I just want to hit again, as Donnie, I said to him earlier, you're as smart as the book. Donnie hasn't read these books, but he said so much stuff that's in the book. Both of these books really talk a lot about the importance of technology makes everything easier, but in a lot of ways, the easier it is, we have become less mentally strong people. So, like, he takes, for example, in the thing, teaching your kid to play an instrument, we can say, hey, play me some music. And before, what that would mean is I've actually got to take the skill and the discipline and the mental activity to learn how to play an instrument. But now if I tell you to play a music, every person picks up their phone, goes to Spotify, plays a song. Takes no skill, takes no effort. And then this is what happens. When it takes a while and it starts to buffer, I lose my freaking mind. How is this going? I have no patience for this because I don't know. But when it took me 5 years to learn to play the piano, and I'm still not great, it's going to take me 10 years to get proficient at it, man, that teaches me patience. Right now, my kids are watching TV in the other room, but we only have one TV in our home. They don't have TVs in their room. So they know they're going to have to share the TV. One of my daughters is in the room with me right now while I'm filming this. Faith, are you a little bored right now? Faith is very bored, she just said. But that's okay, because you know what happens in boredom? You become creative. You know what happens in boredom? You start to talk to other people. You know what happens in boredom? You start to have interactions. We are so scared of being bored. We are so scared of things being tough. And phones make it in such a way that I never have to be bored and nothing ever has to be hard for me. But sometimes life is boring and sometimes life is hard. And we want to be able to train and prepare our kids for that. So nothing we've said here I think is too revolutionary, but we just want to remind you, setting boundaries on your kids, on their technology use, is huge. When your kids start to get social media, letting them know, I have the passwords and you don't get to just use social media whenever you want to. There are limits to that. And I get to know what's happening, not because I don't trust you, but because you're young and I want to help train you that the things people say to you on here and the way people interact with you on here, I want to be able to help walk you through that because I want you to be wise. Not a tech-free family, a tech-wise family, because ultimately I want you to be a person who can find a way to not become the user of the technology, but to use technology to love other people. And so that's what we want. We want to help our kids learn to love Jesus and his way of life. And I think Ron's Gone Wrong will give you a great chance for you to talk to your kids about why you're making some of the decisions that you are. Why are we choosing to maybe stop letting our tablets just roam free, and our tablets are going to have a home and they're going to live in that home? And why we're going to put limits, and we're going to use Ron's Gone Wrong to talk about that. But regardless, we hope you guys come back next week when we talk about how to love Jesus and his way of life even more. We'll see you then.